Lieutenant Governor Ivey, thanks a lot. Thanks for your service to your country and your state, and thanks for telling us the story of your father. We appreciate that, and we appreciate his service and his sacrifice for our country. And by the way, thanks for saying that sequestration's a bad idea. Talk about a nightmare. Okay, we're honored now to have our first speaker, kickoff speaker, and no stranger to most of you in this room, General David Perkins, the Commanding General of the United States Army Training and Doctrine Command, and he will present it's his program and the Chief's program, Win in a Complex World, and God knows it is complex and becoming more complex. So, General Perkins, how about a nice hand?
Thanks, sir. Appreciate it. Well, it is an honor to be here today, and my thanks to General Sullivan, first of all, personally, for your continued leadership, inspiration, and support, not only for our Army, but for our nation and your whole team at AUSA that really take it over the top every time we have any one of these events, both telling the story of the United States Army and therefore you're telling the story of the United States of America. To the folks here that have worked both behind the scenes and in front of the scenes getting it set up, a great team, and obviously off to a banner start. Governor, again, thanks for continuing on the legacy of your father by supporting our Army in this great nation. To some of my battle buddies there, Vice, thanks for being here, the rock that we all lean on in the Army, taking on all those very difficult tasks. God bless your effort in selfless service. My battle buddy, Dennis Vi, sort of our hometown hero here, in supporting us as we put this together, and just a great partner. Ms. Shu, you and all the ASALT folks, again, great partners as we forge the future. And that's what I'm really going to talk today about, is kind of set up from the TRADOC point of view, what we're doing for the long term, and hopefully kind of set up what we're going to do the next couple of days here, and kind of lay out that thread of continuity of the logic, so maybe you can start piecing the bits and parts of this together to see where it's leading. Now, we recently put out our new Army operating concept, Win in a Complex World. I don't go anywhere with that one. If you want your own personal copy, I'm sure my folks have boxes of them. This is our new concept of how we're going to push to 2025 and beyond. It's a bestseller already. Maybe not the New York Times, but at least at the Leavenworth bookstore it is, because it's mandatory reading for all the majors. So, and like all bestsellers, a movie followed. And the movie's about to premiere, but we have a trailer of it here, so if you could please run our quick film.
War has been a math equation, battlefield calculus, all about being ready to fight outnumbered, but winning by possessing overmatch through professional training, improved tactics, and superior weapons systems. Today, the world is increasingly more complex. The future is unknown, unknowable, and constantly changing. Overmatch once seemed a certainty, no longer guaranteed. Cyber attacks, WMD proliferation, extremist ideology, the availability of low-cost technologies, all add to the complexity. It's not just these overt threats that create complex problems. It's the way the world has evolved. Information technology and social media increases the speed of human interaction. Populations migrating to complex urban environments establish hiding grounds for our enemies, an urban quagmire, and a tangle of human interaction. Then there is the unpredictable, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. As complex and unknowable as the world is, how does the Army operate in the future? What options can we provide to prevent conflict, shape security environments, and win our nation's wars? To win in a complex world, our Army must be led by innovative professionals who adapt quickly to ever-changing threats, operate across multiple locations and domains, expeditionary and deployable, rapidly tailored to the mission, off the ramp ready and able to seize, retain, and exploit the initiative and gain and maintain a position of relative advantage. Our Army will never again fight alone. We will be part of a joint, interorganizational, and multinational team, a joint combined arms team. The Army is the foundation of the joint force. It synchronizes the joint capabilities and is the conduit of national power. It integrates and supports joint operations across all domains, ensuring interoperability and synchronization of national power to enhance strategic and operational depth and endurance. As part of the joint force, the Army will dominate wherever and whenever, and for as long as we need to. Dominate by presenting our enemies with multiple dilemmas, which will limit enemy options and avoid their strengths. Exploit our asymmetric capabilities, from our rate of innovation to the human capital of our soldiers. Above all, our Army will overcome these new and constantly evolving threats to the homeland and our nation, providing our leaders with multiple options to win. Our Army has always risen to the challenge. It will continue to rise to whatever challenge our nation and its partners face. This will defend.
So that that highlighted a lot of sort of tenets and capabilities in about a 90-second blast there. I'm going to sort of disassemble it a little bit and point out some of the major capabilities that we are looking to build in the Army and why we want to do it that way, and hopefully give you some insight into how we are looking at the future, and then discuss how we are going to go about getting there, and then show how these panels that we have the next couple of days will add additional light to that. So if you could put up, I only have 2 slides, and really they're both pictures, so it's not going to be too tough here today. Put up the first one, and it is sort of the blow up, kind of a diagram of winning a complex world. What we're saying is that is the problem we're trying to solve, and I'll pick out 2 words there, which there are only a few to begin with, and give the quick definition. When we say complex here, what we define that is a world that, with regards to the future, is unknown, unknowable, and constantly changing. We're saying a desire to predict exactly what is going to happen is almost impossible and never works out. But what we do is we describe what the future is going to be. We describe things that our enemy will do to us. We describe capabilities we have, but we don't get into the role of predicting exactly what we're going to be involved in and when, because that usually is not how it turns out. And if you saw the film, it was about as wide, full range of military operations as you can imagine. But it's also constantly changing, and the rate of change is increasing. And you'll see why when we talk about the capabilities we need, it goes into the requirement to solve any problem in this complex world. And then when we talk about the word win, what we're saying is, and it's amazing, I get a lot of, as I tell folks, as a TRADOC commander, I get a lot of feedback, and that's great. We're a very collaborative organization. The chief has a very collaborative Army. But some of the feedback I get, you could put it maybe in the category of pushback. And if I got any sort of pushback in one area, more than anything else, very interesting, when we published this, it was for putting that word in the document. Because they'll say, hey, Perkins, define win. The Army, it's not up to the Army to define win. It's definitely above the pay grade of the TRADOC commander to define win. They're like, there's a strategic component, there's an economic component, there's a coalition component. I said, wow, that sounds like it's a strategic concept. They're like, exactly. And we're saying, well, that's exactly why we put it in there. Because this concept, we address tactical, operational, and strategic level of war. That we have to build an Army that can operate and affect all 3 levels of war. And we're saying, in reality, you're either winning or losing, to take the active form of the verb. You're winning or losing, and we're defining winning as exploiting the initiative to get to a position of relative advantage. Interesting enough, a couple months ago, I was up at the Halifax Security Conference and sitting on a panel, and I was sort of the rent-a-general there. And they had some sort of great, thoughtful people and political scientists and historians. And the title of the conference, or the panel I was on, it was Winning in an Asymmetric World, Is It Still Possible? And I was the last person to speak. I think they figured that way if they run out of time, no big loss. And so I'm the rent-a-general at the very end, last person to speak, and they're going down, well, you know, the world's very complex, and asymmetry this, and life's hard, et cetera. And they get down to me and say, well, General, is winning in an asymmetric world still possible? And I said, well, I find not only is possible, but it's desirable. I said, I have yet to receive the invitation to sit on the panel losing a noble national goal. And so it's interesting that, continue to get pushback on that. But I can tell you, within the Army, it really is resonating, because we're saying not only is it in the title, it's the first word. What we're saying, that's what the Army focuses on. How do we win? How do we ensure that we are winning? How do we ensure that we're always at a position of relative advantage, that we're always seizing, retaining, and exploiting the initiative? That means you have to always be moving forward. You have to always be repositioning yourself, because the world is very complex. When you define complex, is constantly changing. That means whatever position you have today, even if it's a position of advantage, it's just a matter of time till it becomes a position of disadvantage, or at best neutral. So that is a different kind of leader development model, a different kind of training, and a different kind of way of building the Army. And so what we've done is we've laid out some capabilities and things that the Army sort of has to do, sort of uniquely as the Army. Now, I tell folks, and when you read through this, and as I discussed it today, I said, our goal actually is not to be overly parochial. I said, my job is just to be adequately parochial. As a land force guy, that's my job. But we've looked across the spectrum, and you can see here our friends in the Marine Corps, the Navy, SOF, intergovernmental people, NGOs, international. We've looked at the broad spectrum of all the partners we operate and say that is what it is going to take to get to this position of relative advantage. And who generally has to provide the foundation for the joint force? Again, we're not overly parochial, but saying the Army has a lot of unique capabilities that we are the foundation that the rest of the joint force has got to plug into, so that we can get this position of relative advantage, which is generally occurring on land, because we are trying to compel activity of our adversaries or foes on land, compel their decision-making, compel their actions. So the Army has a unique role of that, to be this foundational force that synchronizes and pulls in the others, and therefore, actually, a lot of responsibilities come with that. Because now that means you've got to design your systems, you have to design your training, you have to design your staffs, such that it is an integral part of it. You're not just doing the land power portion, you are bringing together all these other aspects of the joint force, interagency, international, because what we're saying, you can see the second from the bottom here, integrate partners. And so if you are the brigade from the 101st that goes to Western Africa to work on Ebola, and folks from the World Health Organization walk in, what your immediate response should be, we were expecting you. Our job is to integrate partners. Come on in. We have a planning process. It's not like, well, if you're not a resident graduate of the Command General Staff College, you don't know the Army MDMP, you can't take part in our planning. We knew folks like your team were going to show up. We have a way to integrate you. How do you talk to each other? Well, we have these little things here we bought at Radio Shack. Oh, that's great. We can just dial those in. We can talk to them. It's all interoperable. So that's actually a heavy burden when you say the Army is who you are going to integrate partners with. That means you have to build staffs, you have to have equipment, you have to have networks. They have to easily plug in just as easily as they have to unplug. Because as I work with my great friends in the cyber arena and signal community, everyone talking about integrating partners is hard because there's security issue, policy issues, and there may be folks that we don't want sort of on our nest. I said, well, actually, that's a disintegration problem. Integrating people is easy because we can have anybody on our networks and in our situational awareness capability we want. It's being able to disintegrate them when we want to, or pieces of what we do. So we've got to have that agility that's in there so that we are, because I tell folks, when you talk about win at the strategic level, when you focus only on the tactical level, you focus on synchronizing and delivering firepower, because that's what you do at the tactical level. You deliver firepower. We're saying at the strategic level, which is where you win or lose, you synchronize and deliver national power. And we're saying the Army has a very unique role in providing that ability to bring together, integrate, synchronize, and help deliver with the combatant commanders in the Joint Force national power. And so what we want to have happen is we go any place in the world and someone says, I'd like access to national power of the United States of America. What we say is you just find an Army TOC near you. That the United States Army is a gateway drug to national power. You want access to the United States national power, you go find an Army operation someplace, you go see them, they will integrate you, they will plug you in, they will give you access to all that is deemed appropriate for you to have access so that we can integrate and deliver synchronized national power so we can win at the strategic level. And the reason we have to do that is because we want to provide multiple dilemmas to the enemy. Because that's how you win at the strategic level. Not just a single dilemma to the enemy, multiple dilemmas. Because if the only dilemma you can provide to the enemy is you can target them, what happens is they stop becoming a target. So if you're very good at targeting, they will say, well, that's a dilemma for me, but I will avoid that. So I will no longer coalesce in groups. I may not wear uniforms. I'll go subterranean. Does that all sound familiar? So they literally are avoiding our strengths, which is what we do. When we describe the future in here, we say that is what the enemy will do, is avoid our strengths. And so we have to have multiple dilemmas to put them in a strategic conundrum so that we can be in a position of advantage so we can win in a complex world. So we cannot afford one-trick ponies that only provide one dilemma. The other aspect is we say the enemy will either avoid our strengths or they will use them against us. And so if I am very good at targeting, if I become an expert, the world-class targeter, they can say I'll either avoid their capability to be targeted or I'll use it against them. So if I'm ISIL in Mosul in northern Iraq, say, you know what? If I start cutting people's heads off, I bet the U.S. is going to come target me. Because that's what they do. They target very well. And so what I'll do is I'll go out, get some cheap Toyota pickup trucks, or maybe even better, steal some Ford F-150s that the U.S. already gave the Iraqi army. I'll put some suicide bombers in there, so minimum health care costs, not much training required. And so I don't have a lot invested in this, and I'll start driving them around in convoys. And guess what? It won't be a matter of time, because the U.S. has a dilemma they present me. They can target me. They'll start targeting me. And so we're watching Kill TV at night, and we see the little X on the pickup truck, and we all know what comes next after that. Large explosion, like, well, that smart weapon system, that JDAM, that whatever, took out that pickup truck. And therefore, I won that firefight. And yes, that pickup truck did not have a chance against a JDAM or whatever was dropped on it. So at the tactical level, we won that firefight. But how much money did ISIL have invested in that? Free truck, suicide bomber, et cetera? Probably not much. How much did it cost us to win that firefight by the time you have multi-million-dollar missile, air cap, fuelers, train the pilot, repair the F-15, et cetera? So the enemy, we may have won the tactical firefight, but at the economic exchange ratio, you could say the enemy is winning that strategic battle at the economic exchange ratio. So we have to avoid, as I say, $1 million solutions to $100 problems. Because a $1 million solution to a $100 problem does not put us at a position of relative advantage. That puts us at a position of economic disadvantage at the strategic level. So that's why we're looking at capabilities versus things. What we're saying is the Army does not buy things to fight. We build capability to win. Our focus is building capability to win, not buying things to fight. We will buy things, don't worry, those of you that sell things. But we are going to put it in the context of, does that thing add to my capability to win? Or does that thing put me in a position of disadvantage somehow? Or is the way I'm using that thing put me in a position of disadvantage? Or can I use that thing differently? So we are looking at building capabilities versus buying things, but eventually it will lead to that. And the reason is because we are trying to be able to conduct these types, or build this kind of capability so that we can win at the strategic level. So we have put together a strategy to do that. And being the doctrine person, I pay very close attention to the words I use, because now I'm a firm believer that words have meanings. As a doctrine guy in the Army, and so we talk about strategy. All you SAMS graduates out there know very well that's ends, ways, and means. And we align ways to achieve ends, and then we resource them via means. So we're always talking about strategies to build a capability, not a plan to buy something, but a strategy to build a capability. A lot of times when we probably may have lost our way a little bit, we were focusing on a plan to buy something versus a strategy to build a capability. And so even in my own headquarters, sometimes I go to meetings, I have to remind them the relationship between ends, ways, and means. You figure out what the ends are that you want. There's multiple ways to get it, that you align the ways to achieve an end. And then you take a look at your means available, which then informs you as to what ways are possible. The problem is I would go to a lot of meetings, and instead of aligning ways to get ends, it's a meeting talking about ways to get means. And we just talk about ways to get means. We get means, but we never get an end because we didn't align the ways there. So we have a strategy. And actually, what leaders do is they contextualize the environment. So what I've done is contextualize the strategy for the next 2.5 days here. So if you could put that slide up. Now, as, again, the doctrine guy for the Army, I'd make sure that everything I say and show is doctrinally correct. So, again, a reminder on a doctrinally correct slide in the Army, and especially if you are going toward an objective, the first thing you have to have on the slide is an arrow that starts in the bottom left, ends up in the upper right, and is always going up. What is always at the end of the arrow is something good that you are trying to attain, and there are always evenly spaced events on the arrow. If there are not evenly spaced events, that's when you throw in an IPR to the CG so that you have evenly spaced events. So this is a doctrinally correct slide. It starts from the bottom left to the upper right. This is good and evenly spaced events. So what we are going to do with regards to this, the means, you can see right here from the TRADOC point of view, who's worked with the chief and the vice and the AMC commander and Miss Shu, the means, I don't even mention money initially, which is, I know, a shock to some folks. The means is we are doing this in a collaborative way, bringing together all the stakeholders, which is why this conference is so important, because all the stakeholders, so the folks on DA staff, AMC, ForceCom, TRADOC, out in industry, academia, these are all the stakeholders that people have input into what's going on in HR, and the other panels are going to talk about it shortly. We have built a new collaborative approach to bring all of those folks together so that we can prioritize what we're going to do. We know we won't get everything we ask for, but we have to have prioritization, and that's based on determining what we want to achieve and then managing risk. So we are telling people from the very beginning, we are going to take risk. Why? Because that's how you exploit the initiative. That gets back to winning a complex world. We are not avoiding risk to prevent defeat or failure. We are minimizing and making prudent risk so that we can exploit some opportunities that come along so we can get to a position of advantage, which means we're going to highlight risk. We're going to lay it out there, and then we're going to have to make hard decisions and prioritize. And the ways, what we are going to do, you can see we talk about experimenting, modernizing, assessing, developing, etc. And thanks to our good folks here at AUSA, these things all line up here in the next couple of days. So here are the various venues the next couple of days where we are going to talk about, in fact, the next one after me, are the warfighting challenges. Okay, and that's going to talk about how we collaborate, how we take a look at capabilities throughout the Army across all of our warfighting functions, and on and on and on. So it almost like this whole thing was planned this way. It's almost like you had a strategy when you sat down and talked about what are we going to do at AUSA, what are the end strengths, what are the means, what does it have to do? The title of there is Win in a Complex World. What does it have to do with it? Well, again, you know, this is in some ways sort of a shameless push for the upcoming panels we have, but I wanted to sort of tie it together to say these are the activities, these are the ways that we are going to build that capability in the United States Army to win in a complex world. Now, what I'd like to do, I guess we have questions, or I see things being brought up, or no, or yes, or I'll be agile. No questions, okay. We'll save them for HR in his panel, so any real hard ones out there? Just one, okay. Oh, that's all right. Okay, there we go. All right. Get my glasses out here, get serious. Let's see. Focus in industry, government collaboration, investment with R&D budgets, decreasing government expectation. The industry will not invest and provide more mature solutions. Integrates the concepts. Yeah, so interesting. And they talk about AR 71-9. We actually are in the process of updating AR 71-9 right now. We're working with the Army staff under the guidance of the Vice and the Under to say, hey, how do we approach this differently? How do we increase sort of our rate of delivery of things we want to have? How do we measure risk? Because sometimes we measure risk by saying, here is this fairly large and cumbersome set of requirements, and if I don't meet all those requirements, I have tactical risk on the battlefield. That's a way of it. But another risk is, or if I come up with requirements that are, defy the law of physics, and therefore the ability to produce it is questionable, there's a risk in that by saying you probably will never get it. Or if you have requirements that literally price yourself out of business, then there's a risk you just can't fill it in adequate time or adequate quantity. And so we're looking back very intently at our requirements process to say, when you put a requirement out there, what are what I call the sizing constructs of an organization? What is making this, and I will talk about a thing, what is making this thing so difficult to produce, to maintain, to buy, et cetera, like that? And where is the sort of the sensitivity now to say, if I could change this one requirement, because see, when you focus on buying things, you assume I'm just going to fight this thing all by itself. And there sometimes we lose sight of the requirements, and we assume, well, this thing is going to be in the battlefield, it's got to be impervious to all known munitions, it's got to fly, it's got to float, it's got to do all that. The problem is the Army doesn't fight things, we fight formations, and we deploy capability. So we're looking at formation-based capabilities versus thing-verse capabilities. And what that does is it lets us, as we talk about right here, it lets us manage risk. Well, if I can take some risk with this thing, but provide a capability here, give a doctrinal solution to it, an organizational solution, a training and leader development solution, then I can actually maybe get to a capability. And so that is probably one of the biggest changes we have with regards to this requirements process here, is we're looking at capabilities of formations versus KPPs or performance measures of things, because that's usually where we sort of lost sight of the bigger picture. Let's see, what risks are we having? What risks are we having to take? What risks are we having to take? I kind of outlined it there that, and if you saw the chart before this, one of the things we're also looking at very intently is from a joint force, when you take a look at deploying a force or a capability, how can those risks be spread out not only within the Army but in the joint community? And so actually the Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Dunford's coming down to TRADOC next week, so almost spending a whole day there. And we're going to talk to General Dunford, Ken Gluck, who's a McCITIC commander, and all our friends in the great U.S. Marine Corps, and say, look, this is how the Army's thinking about our operating concept. What are you thinking about it? How do you work together? How do we deploy transition quickly to operations to exploit the initiative to get to a position of relative advantage. So when we take a look at managing risk, we're looking at not only from an Army point of view, but from a joint point of view as well as interagency and coalition part. I see we have a number of coalition partners here. So we're working very tightly on our interoperability and what interoperability really means. And I know John Charlton's out there in the audience, maybe talking about Army warfighting assessment, where we're really going to push that with a number of our partner nations. So we just have to get much more holistic and really a little bit more sophisticated and include all of the components of risk, not just sometimes key performance parameters with regards to a very narrow tactical version of risk. Well, folks, I know that my job is not to get us off schedule. So I'd just like to wrap up again, thanking General Sullivan and AUSA providing this great forum, a great, well-thought-out strategy on how we're going to tie all this together. So at the end of this, everyone will have a better idea of where we're going, how we're going to get there, how folks can contribute to it, and a clear understanding when we talk about winning a complex world, what that really means. So thanks a lot, folks.